Here we are with day 3, which is a look at the role of women during the American Revolution. So we want to first start with this do now question. Women should be allowed to be active in our military. Actually, not a question. This includes fighting a war. I want you to generate a list. So I just want you to think about what women should be allowed to do during war. And just a side note here, I did serve in the United States military years ago in the 90s, so I do have a different view with regard to the role of women in the infantry, and just pointing that out. So I want you to think about this here, women in war. What are students saying in class? Yes, no. How many yeses do we have? How many nos do we have? And we want to kind of figure out what the main arguments are. Some of the points made from last class that we are not going to address here. If you want to know anything about coverture or the difference between adultery and fornication, feel free to look at the screencast for lesson 2. So for the most part, we're going to be looking at these particular items here for the American Revolution and evidence of society once again needing women. As you study women history in the United States, I want you to think of steps. During a time of crisis, women advance. So they're at the bottom, they have no rights or limited rights. And then there's a time of war, and they're willing to give women, I don't know, jobs or access to different doors within society. So they wind up taking a couple of steps forward. But as you find, once the societal need is no longer there, women go straight back down to the bottom. A good example of this would be World War One. During World War One, women were making the weapons that were needed to fight the war. And then at the end of the war, those jobs were stripped from women, using the argument that men needed jobs so that they could provide for their family. That's what I mean here when society needs women. And we see in education, there's a societal need. World War One, pretty much all the wars, there's usually a need for women to kind of do something, and society's willing to give them rights. The role of the boycott. This one was interesting when I had first come across this, because I remember studying the American Revolution in middle school, and they talked about the boycott, the Stamp Act, and we're boycotting goods, and it never crossed my mind to think about, well, if we're boycotting goods, how do we get those goods? Who's making those goods? And you come to find out in this reading that it was actually the women. Women in business after their husbands leave to fight. I'll address this one in the reading. The American Revolution, revolution against oppression, freed women from colonial America's oppressive devices. Something like coverture or divorce laws, the answer would be no. And then we'll look at these 3 items in the reading to get a sense of what happened at the end of the American Revolution. So here we go. Looking at the reading, we see this particular section right here. If men were going to have to fight, women were going to have to take over their farms and businesses. So let's just say you have a town here. I don't know. We have 10 males. They're going off to fight the revolution. Somebody has to maintain that property. And the women are the ones taking up that role, fulfilling that void. So again, during a time of need, in this case, the American Revolution, they are the ones that are going to be maintaining the farms and businesses. And as we addressed last class, coverture, as well as property rights, they seem to be out of the hands of women. But because there is a societal need, women are going to be the ones running these particular institutions. Here we see the boycott, last section right here. For the boycott to work, women would have to step in a breach and provide the cloth and foodstuff that can no longer be brought in from overseas. So we see women fulfilling that void once again. Abigail Adams. Abigail Adams plays a key role in this particular reading. Let's see what I'm looking for here. So here, Abigail Adams is writing to her husband, John Adams. And she is saying to him, um, let us renounce them. So here she is talking about separating, fighting that revolution. So she seems to be by his side. She seems to be somebody saying, you know what, I'm going to support my husband. And that pretty much seems to be the approach, because you definitely want to be, at this particular point, if you want to be pure, submissive, something we'll look at later, domestic, and devoted. So here she is displaying the virtue of devotion, um, by standing by her man, her husband, supporting him, and what eventually is going to become this war. And this is the part that is crucial here. Uh, Here she writes once again, in the new code of laws. So this is, after the war is over, and they're about to create this new country that's going to become the United States of America. And she writes to him. She says, in the new code of laws, which I suppose will be necessary for you to take, make I desire you remember the ladies. For you to make I desire. So she's basically telling him, do something about women. Um, we were here contributing, paying our blood tax. And if you have never heard that particular term, a blood tax is a tax that people pay to their society. Men historically pay their blood tax through war, and women pay it through birth. Just a side note here, this seems to be an issue with historically gay men. How could they ever pay their blood tax? Um, or to women if they're not providing children? And so if gay men are not allowed to serve in the military, they can never pay their blood tax. And that blood tax, by engaging either Act 1 or Act 2, these are viewed as patriotic. And so if gay couples are not allowed to pay their blood tax, it might be a way to accept discrimination against that particular group, because the argument would be, well, they never pay their blood tax, they don't fight wars, or they don't provide children. So that would be used to, argue against giving gay men and gay women, rights within a society. Now, keep in mind, all you need to do is allow gay men to serve in the military, and of course, you avoid this whole argument. So possibly there seems to be another issue at hand that we will address in the gay rights section. So I just wanted to address the issue of the blood tax, because in the reading, they do bring up this story here about women putting on clothing and fighting, in the army. And this definitely becomes an issue in the gay rights. You don't want to impersonate a male. That becomes problematic. We will look at a couple of cases where women were found guilty of dressing up as men and fighting in wars. And we'll get to that when we get to that particular section. Anyway, so going back to Abigail Adams. So she writes, basically telling him, look, remember the women. We participated. We supported you. We did our boycott. We did what we have to. And Adams' response, to your extraordinary code of laws, he wrote, I cannot but laugh. So in class, when I refer to this section, which I might do repeatedly, I cannot but laugh is a reference to his response to his wife's plea. Last thing we want to address here is the role of New Jersey. So, we tend to think in this society here that North United States seems to be more progressive and supportive of rights, and the opposite is possibly the reality here. So here they're looking at the state of New Jersey and how his suggested reforms included the end to female suffrage. So in the state, women are allowed to vote. And then when you get to this particular section here, they're basically arguing that we need to limit the vote. And here he talks about defending limitation franchise to free white male citizens. So these are the people we want voting. Women are not going to vote, but it's interesting to point out here that at this point, people in the state of New Jersey were women were allowed to vote, but then as a result of this individual here, Mr. John Condit, um, they wind up reversing that particular law. Legislator voted to stop women from voting in the one state where the rights of citizens had been acknowledged. Mr. Condit had his revenge, and women lost their official voice in American politics for the next century. And that's it for the American Revolution piece.